Today I'll be reading Chapter 9 of Lion, A Long Way Home. Chapter 9, Finding Home. On the 31st of March 2011, I began to travel a train line, but the countryside looked a bit green for my dusty old town. I'd follow a line to a junction, but then I zoomed out and idly flicked the map along. I wanted a quick look at where the line from the junction went as it headed west. I watched hills, forests, and rivers sweep by until I noticed a large river that fed into what looked like a massive, deep blue lake called Nao Damayanti Sagar. It was surrounded by some lush country, and there were mountains to its north. For a while, I enjoyed a little exploration, as if I was on a hike on a huge scale. It was getting late, and I'd turn in soon. I noticed there didn't seem to be any train lines in this part of the country. Curious, I found myself looking for one. How did people of this region travel without rail? Then, as the countryside flattened out into farmlands to the west, I finally came across the little blue symbol for a train station. I was somehow reassured to find it, and I checked out the tiny wayside station, just a few buildings to the side of a reasonably major train line with several tracks. Out of habit, I started tracing the route as it wound southwest. I quickly came across another slightly bigger station, again with a platform on only one side of the tracks, but with the township spread out on either side. That explained the overpass. And was that a water tower just nearby? Holding my breath, I zoomed in for a closer look. Sure enough, it was a municipal water tank just across from the platform, not far from a large pedestrian overpass spanning the railway line. I scrolled over to the town side and saw something incredible. A horseshoe-shaped road around a square immediately outside the station. The ring road I used to be able to see from the platform. Could it be? I zoomed out and discovered that the train line skimmed the northwest of a really large town. I clicked on the blue train station symbol to reveal its name, and my heart nearly stopped. Burmapur? I didn't recognize the town, but then I never visited it. I never left the platform. I zoomed back in and re-examined the ring road, the water tower, the overpass, and they were all exactly as I'd remembered them. That meant not far away, just up the line, I should find my hometown, Ganistale. Almost afraid to go on, I crept along the train line to the north. When I saw that the train track crossed a gorge just on the edge of the built-up area, I was flooded with adrenaline. I remembered in a flash that the train I took with my brothers traveled on a small bridge over a gorge like that, before pulling into the station. I pushed on more urgently, east then northeast, in moments zooming over 70 kilometers of green farms, some forested hills, and small rivers. Then I passed across some dry, flat land broken up by a patchwork of irrigated farmland and the occasional small village, before I hit a bridge over a substantial river. I could see the town's outskirts ahead. Below a bridge, dam walls on either side of the river restricted its flow. If this was the right place, this was the river I used to play in, and there should be a bigger concrete dam wall to my right a little further from the bridge. And there it was. Clearly visible in the sunshine of the day, the satellite passed overhead and took the picture. I sat staring at the screen for what seemed like an eternity. What I was looking at matched the picture in my head exactly. I couldn't think straight, frozen with excitement and terrified to go on. Finally, I forced myself to take the next step, slowly, nervously. If I really was looking at Gninsele for the first time in 24 years, then I should be able to follow the path. I remembered from the riverbank back to the train station, only a short way up ahead. I began to trace the course of the path, which wound along beside a tributary stream, left and right, around a field, under a street overpass, and then the station. I clicked on the blue symbol and the name came up on the screen. Khandwa Railway Station. Khandwa? The name meant nothing to me. My stomach knotted. How could this be? Everything was perfect, all the way from Burmapur, which surely must be the B town I had tried to remember. But if the bridge and the river were correct, where were Gninsele? I tried not to despair. I had spent a lot of time in and around our local train station as a boy, so I checked off what I remembered: the 3 platforms, the covered pedestrian overpass that connected them, an underpass road beneath the tracks at the northern end. All these features were reasonably common, but not in the precise arrangement I remembered. It all checked out. I remembered a huge fountain in a park near the underpass and went looking for it. Sure enough, I thought I detected its familiar circular shape, a little indistinct, in a central clearing, surrounded by trees. From there, I knew the route to where my home should be. I'd gone over and over it in my head since I was a little boy, so that I never forgot it. I followed the road up from the fountain and along the route of the underpass, and then through the streets and alleys I had walked as a child. It was the way I used to imagine myself walking when I lay in bed in Hobart at night, trying to trying to project myself home to let my mother know I was okay. Before I realized I'd gone far enough and I was looking down at the neighborhood, I knew as a boy I was sure of it. Still, nothing like Gninsele came up on the map. It was the strangest feeling. Part of me knew, but part of me doubted. I was sure this was the right place, but for all this time I'd also been sure of the name Gninsele. Khandwa rang no bells whatsoever. Maybe Gninsele was a suburb of Khandwa. That seemed possible. I looked through the maze of alleys where had lived. When I looked at my suburb in Hobart, the image was very clear. This image was a little blurry, but I was sure I could see the little rectangular roof of my childhood home. Of course, I'd never seen the place from above, but the building was the right shape and just where it ought to be. I hovered over the streets for a while, astonished, trying to take it all in. Then I couldn't contain my excitement any longer. Lisa, I found my hometown. You've got to come and see this. It was only then that I realized it was the middle of the night. Apart from a short dinner break, I'd been at the computer for over 7 hours. Lisa poked her head around the corner, yawning in her nightie. It took her a moment to wake up properly, but even half asleep, she could see I was excited. Are you sure? She asked. This is it. This is it, I replied. In that moment, I was convinced. This is my hometown. It had taken 8 months of intense searching over the nearly 5 years since I'd first downloaded Google Earth. Lisa grinned and hugged me tight. That's so great. You did it, Saru. After a sleepless night, I went to see Dad at work. For him, the news would come out of the blue. I tried to rehearse what I was going to say, but in the end, I blurted out, Dad, I think I found my hometown. He turned away from his computer and said, Really? On a map? I could tell he was skeptical. You're sure? I knew Dad was worried that I might get my hopes up only to have them dashed. His caution was understandable, but I needed him to know that I was convinced, and I wanted him to be too. Telling Dad somehow made the discovery real. I didn't have any firm plans about what to do next, but sharing the news made me realize that this was just the start, not the end of a journey. From that moment, it was clear that this was a life changing discovery for all of us, even if I found out nothing more. I was particularly anxious about telling Mum because she had such a strong belief in adoption and the family it had created. I was worried about how my news would affect her, even upset her. So that night we gathered at the family home, each of us slightly on edge. I was eager to show them the Google Earth images that had convinced me I'd found my hometown, but they responded cautiously. The idea seemed incredible. I'd used a bird's eye view to search one of the most populated countries on Earth, looking for landmarks I remembered from when I was 5, and actually found what I was looking for. I showed them the walled dam on the southern edge of Kandwa, the train lines and the underpass I walked through to get to the station, just as I had described it all to Mom when I was little. At the back of our minds, I think we all wondered what this discovery would mean for the future. Perhaps my parents had always thought this day would come and fear their son would be reclaimed by India and perhaps lost to them. Our celebratory dinner was slightly muted, and all of us had lots of questions on our minds. When I arrived home afterwards, I was full of nervy energy and went straight back to my computer. Maybe there were other ways of confirming what I had already knew. I turned to another tool that hadn't been around when I started my search: Facebook. I searched for Kandwa and came up a group called Kandwa, My Hometown. I sent a message to the group administrator. Can anyone help me? I think I'm from Kandwa. I haven't seen or been back to the place for 24 years. Just wondering if there's a big fountain near the cinema. The fountain was the most distinct landmark I could remember. The park where it was located was a busy meeting place, and the circular fountain had a statue of a wise man sitting cross-legged. I never knew who he was supposed to be. Some of the town's dreadlocked Hindu holy men, who I now knew were called sadhus, bathed in its cool waters and forbade anyone else from doing so. I remembered once gashing my leg on a barbed wire fence running away from them, after my brothers and I crept into the fountain on a really hot day. My destiny appeared to be riddled with close calls, chance episodes, and wonderful, blessed luck. Perhaps my luck would continue. I went to bed for another restless night. When I woke next day, I opened my computer and saw a response to my query about the fountain on the Kandwa Facebook page. Well, we can't tell you exactly. There is a garden near cinema, but the fountain is not that much big. The cinema is closed for years. We will try to update some pics. Hope you will recollect something. It was deflating. I cursed myself for getting carried away and telling everyone before I was absolutely sure. Later that day or the next, Mom told me she had looked at the map we'd drawn together in her notebook when I was 6, and the position of the bridge, the river, and the train station weren't quite what I'd shown her on Google Earth. But was that because I had the wrong place, or because I had trouble drawing an accurate map as a 6-year-old? She'd also pull out the wall map I used to have in my bedroom. She kept everything to do with our childhood, and had been surprised to find that it had both Burnapur and Kandwa marked on it. To her, they seemed so far away from Calcutta that she wondered whether it was possible. I traveled such a vast distance. It was almost right across the country. So my home had been marked on the map above my desk the whole time. If I'd only known where to look. How many times had I stared at all those names? If I had noticed Burnapur, I'd obviously written it off as being too far from Kolkata. And it was much further than I had thought possible. Was it too far? Did the trains go much faster than I allowed for? Or had I been on the train for longer than I thought? The things I'd always been so certain about were dissolving in the face of what I'd found. Would the search erode what I thought I knew and leave me with nothing? It took me a couple of days to think to ask the Khandwa group the obvious question. Can anyone tell me the name of the town or suburb on the top right hand side of Khandwa? I think it starts with G. I'm not sure how you spell it, but I think it goes like this, Ganestale. The town is Muslim one side and Hindus on the other, which was 24 years ago, but might be different now. It took another day to get an answer, but when the answer came, it was heart-stopping. Ganesh Tale. This was as close to my childhood mispronunciation as you could hope for. In my excitement, I called Mom and Dad immediately to tell them that now there could be no doubt. It all lined up. I had found Burnapur, Khandwa, and now, vitally, I had found Ganesh Tale, the area where I lived, where my Indian family might still be living, wondering what had become of me. I wasn't sure what to do next. It was overwhelming. I kept revisiting the streets of Khandwa on my laptop, searching them for signs, almost paralyzed by the prospect of the truth. It was like the time when Mantosh and I were kids, too scared to go to India on the family trip for fear of what we might find. I tried to convince myself my family couldn't possibly still be there after all this time. How old would my mother be by now? I wasn't sure, but she lived a hard life as a laborer, and life expectancy for a woman like her probably wasn't great. Was my sister Shakila okay? And Kalu? What had happened to Gadu the night in Burnapur? Did he blame himself for my getting lost? Would any of them recognize me if we met again? Would I recognize them? How could you possibly find four people in India, even if you knew where they lived a quarter of a century ago? Surely it was possible. My mind pinged back and forth between hope and fear. There was only one way to be sure. I had to go to Ganesh Tale and see for myself. And then, if it was my home, I told myself I would be happy just to take off my shoes and feel the earth beneath my feet and remember the times when I used to walk those streets and paths. I couldn't let myself think further than that about anyone who might still be living there. I knew my parents would worry about my going to India. Would it stir up old traumas? And if Ganesh Tale was the wrong place, would I despair entirely? Or would I stay there and search for the right one? I researched Khandwa, a small regional city in the state of Madhya Pradesh. It had a population about the same size as Hobart's, and Hindu was the main religion. It was a quiet area well known for its cotton, wheat, and soybean farming, as well as a major power plant. My family was too poor to be involved in any of that, so all of this was news to me. Like most Indian cities, it's got a long history and a list of Hindu saints attached to it, and it can boast of a writer and a family of Bollywood stars who grew up there. It's not on the tourist trail, but it is on a significant rail junction where the major east-west line between Mumbai and Kolkata meet another trunk route running from Delhi down to Goa and Kochi. That explains why Khandwa station is much larger than the one at Burnapur, although the towns are about the same size. I watched the few clips of the town on YouTube, but it was hard to tell much from these images. Some footage showed the underpass near the railway station, apparently known as Teen Pulia, and the pedestrian overpass across the tracks, which appeared to have been extended over all three platforms. It still looked like home. After a few weeks, I summoned the courage to talk to Mom and Dad. What would you do in my situation? I asked. It's obvious. You have to go, they said. And Lisa felt the same way. They all wanted to come with me. I was relieved and touched, but I needed to go alone. If I was wrong, I didn't want to find out in front of my family. And I also didn't want a group of us descending on Ganesh Tale and making a big scene. Who knew what problems that might cause? I wanted to search for my home quietly and privately. I could probably have tracked down a phone number for the local police or the hospital in Ganesh Tale and called to ask them about my family or to search for my medical records. I could have provided my family's names at least and made some inquiries. It's not a big neighborhood and everyone knew everyone. But I feared that word would get out and chancers would start appearing, making false claims. Some might well like the idea of a comparatively well off prodigal son from the West. And it wouldn't be surprising if a few potential mothers returned up at the station ready to claim their long lost boy. By the time I got there, I might have made it harder to find the real people I was looking for. Thankfully, Lisa understood, but my parents were more insistent. Dad promised they would keep out of the way, or perhaps just he would come and stay in the hotel. Then at least he'd be on hand. These were kind and well meaning offers, but I'd made up my mind. It took 11 months from when I first identified Ganesh Tale to when I eventually boarded the plane to India. Apart from my childhood flight to Australia, it was my first major trip anywhere. There had been problems with my citizenship, which had taken time to sort out and all the usual travel issues, but the truth is I was putting things off. I was extremely anxious about the trip. I would have to face up to some bad memories returning to India, and I wondered how I'd handle it. I didn't really know if I'd found the right place or whether my family would still be there. When the day finally came, Mom, Lisa, and I had a final cup of coffee together at the airport. I realized from their advice to me that I hadn't done such a great job at disguising my anxiety. Then Mom handed me a sheet of photos she'd scanned, showing me as a little boy. It had been 25 years since I'd been in India. Even my own family might need help recognizing me. I lingered over final goodbyes, feeling sick with nerves. Mom looked anxious, and I suddenly wondered what I was doing. Did I need to find out about the past when I had people who loved me right here? Of course, the answer was yes. I had to find out where I came from, and at the very least, I wanted to see the place I had always dreamed about. I got on the plane.